rule nuclear threat. Now, the Iranians always said the nuclear program is purely civilian, but in the last months and few years, they have been enriching uranium to build up a stockpile of fissile material, such that they're thought to now have the sort of enough material to build 9 nuclear bombs, should they decide to do so. Now, that would take a number of stages. To end up with those bombs, it would take between 18 months to 2 years. But what they have done recently is not come up with a credible explanation to the IAEA, the global nuclear watchdog, about their undeclared nuclear material, which they're not allowed to have under the agreements they've reached with the West and international treaties that they've signed. And the IAEA yesterday decided that it would censure Iran and find it culpable of being in breach with its nuclear obligations for the first time in 20 years. Now, that may be the pretext, that we've heard from the Israelis already saying that that was unacceptable. That may be the pretext that Benjamin Netanyahu decides was sufficient for him to then launch this attack. But certainly there's been mounting concern about Iran's nuclear activity, and no one's really been convinced that its program is purely civilian. But I think, as I said at the beginning, I think most people had expected this to play out over we've seen the Iranians and the Israelis being bogged down to try UN, such as we might have seen, we did see during the build-up to the Iraq War. I think there was an expectation of a process that would start unfolding, and the clock would start ticking, and we would start seeing a countdown towards possible military action. Well, the Israelis have jumped the gun, and they've clearly decided to do so because they believe that surprise will help them, that time is not on their side, and the longer they let the clock play out. And they've decided to choose this moment to attack Iran, probably when Iran was not expecting it either, although there have been warnings in the last few days that some kind of military action was imminent. I think, as I say, most observers, particularly in Israel, but probably in Iran as well, had thought that that was a bit of a bluff, and that Israel was being used by the Americans to give Donald Trump a bit of muscle in his negotiations with the Iranians. Sort of Israeli heavies coming on side to try and put pressure on the Iranians in these nuclear talks. And I think, the Israelis have surprised us by making it clear this wasn't a bluff. This was not a negotiating tactic. This was for real, this threat of military action. They're carrying it out now, and they will continue to do so over the coming days. And clearly their intent is to try and totally destroy the nuclear threat they've always believed emanates from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Dominic, you mentioned the United Nations a little earlier. Do you think that any of the neighboring Arab countries or other Western nations have any role to play in trying to lessen tensions between Iran and Israel?
I think they'll want to play a role, and we saw them come to the aid, some of them, of Israel during those attacks, those direct attacks and exchange of fire between the Israelis and the Iranians last year. We saw the Jordanians giving the Israelis the right to fly through their airspace to try and repel the attacks from Iran. We may see attempts diplomatically, I think, now from regional neighbors to try and defuse the tensions. But clearly Israel has the bit between its teeth, and Israel is not going to, I think, hold back or ease its military pressure on Iran until it believes it's got somewhere near achieving its military objectives. So I think, as you say, we're going to see frantic diplomatic activity to try and make this as short as possible and to reduce the tensions and trying to contain this as much as diplomats can, so it doesn't spiral into a much bigger escalating regional crisis. But in the past, when Israel believes it has a job to do, it tends to carry it out regardless of what other observers and other outside powers make of what it's doing. And I think we have to stress here, there is a risk of, I think people waking up today will be shocked, deeply alarmed by what Israel is doing against Iran. Shocked, regardless of where they come down in the debate over Iran's nuclear program. But we have to stress it could get a lot worse. If Israel continues with this and Iran does strike back, and I think it's a fairly big if Iran has still got the wherewithal to escalate this further Iran is unlikely to aim its fire this time just at the Jewish state. It's going to be striking back, as it's warned in the past, left, right and centre, lashing out, trying to make the price for this action by Israel simply too high for it to continue. So, we'll have to see what the Iranians do, but the expectation has always been that if they were struck, they wouldn't just strike back at Israel, they would fire across the Gulf, towards the UAE, possibly towards Bahrain, towards Qatar, where American bases are, but also the oil refineries, oil installations, to make the pain that they'll be feeling shared with not just regional neighbours, but obviously the rest of us, because if the Persian Gulf goes up in flames, if this really important strategic waterway becomes a war zone, the impact on oil, on global trade will be enormous, and we will probably all pay the price.
Dominic, we've just had a statement come in from the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog. Let me read it to you. He said Israel launched a targeted operation to neutralize an immediate and existential threat to our people. And then he goes on to say Israel has the inherent right and the solemn duty to defend itself and will always do so with determination and clarity. So this coming in to us from the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog. It does seem that Israel is united behind this action taken over the past few hours.
Well, certainly at the top level, yes, amongst officials, as you'd expect, the president there, supporting the actions of the government. The president's role in Israel is largely symbolic, and he's not sort of at the centre of policy making, but you'd expect him to support whatever action the Israeli government takes. And I think, many Israelis will echo those sentiments. The Israelis have been told for many, many years that Iran wants to destroy them, and the Iranians have given them plenty of rhetoric to believe that. People like Ahmadinejad, the former Iranian president, talking about erasing Israel from the face of the earth. There's a semantic debate about what exactly he means, but I think in the minds of many Israelis, whose state exists to prevent any attempts, any repeats of the many attempts over history to erase the Jewish people from the earth. They believe that Iran is an existential threat, many Israelis, and they believe that their government has a sacred duty to protect them from that threat. Now, the debate about the Iranian nuclear program, the Iranians saying it's purely civilian, the Israelis saying they believe it's there very much to carry out eventually an existential attack, a genocidal attack on the Jewish state, and those in the middle who say actually it's more to try and extract concessions and to get more out of the international community in what has been a tortuous process of negotiation over that nuclear program. But for the Israelis, it's clear that the Iranian program is a threat to them and therefore needs to be at some point eradicated. The challenge for the Israeli government, of course, has always been it's a massive military job to do so, and the Iranians have done whatever they can to bury their nuclear facilities, their enrichment facilities, deep underground in places like Natanz and Fordow, Kermanshah, in some cases actually under mountains. And the Israelis have used a number of ingenious methods to try and counter and destroy and slow down its nuclear progress. So they've, along with the Americans, came up with an ingenious cyber weapon, Stuxnet, that actually blew up centrifuge machines using software to get inside the system of Iran's nuclear program and literally take out these machines one by one. They've also had a rolling assassination program, taking out one Iranian nuclear scientist after another, car bombs and other mysterious things going bang in the night, killing Iranian nuclear scientists. Now, they've added to that overnight by taking out, it seems, at least 3 Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders, the chief of the IRGC, Hossein Salami, Khatam al-Anbiya, Gholam Ali Rashid, and the chief of staff of the armed forces, Mohammed Bagheri. I mean, that is an astonishing roll of names for the Israelis to have assassinated. We know that the Israelis have penetrated Iranian society very deeply with intelligence, but we're not entirely sure at the moment how these top commanders were killed, whether it was from the air or on the ground, carried out by special forces or intelligence agents. Not entirely clear, but certainly the Israelis are trying to go through the top levels of not just the Iranian nuclear program, not just their scientists and officials, but also military commanders, believing that eradicating that sort of top, taking off the head of the snake, as the Israelis will probably put it, will be very effective at weakening the nuclear program. But I think that gives us a clear sense that this isn't just, I think, what most people had expected: airstrikes, hitting bunkers, hitting enrichment facilities. They're also going after people, and they're doing so in very targeted, specific ways, in a way that will, I think, surprise many people. But given what we've seen in the last people like Nasrallah and Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, actually in the Iranian capital, Tehran, they have developed a formidable capability of destroying their enemies one by one, and they're going to carry on deploying it to try and weaken Iran as much as they can.
And interestingly, in the past hour or so, we heard from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They issued a statement specifically relating to their head, Hossein Salami, who, as you said, has been killed in those strikes, saying that they will exact revenge. So obviously, as you were mentioning, Israeli strikes taking out people of very high level within the Iranian regime. Dominic Waghorn, our international affairs editor. Dominic, thank you very much for that. And as Dominic was giving us the overview, our correspondent David Blevins has more reaction now from the U.S. after Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed that Washington had no involvement in these strikes.
The United States is seeking to distance itself right now from these strikes, although it is very clear that the Trump administration had advance notice. The president's national security team was monitoring the strikes in real time from the Situation Room at the White House, we understand. Now, we are not expected to hear from the president this evening, but we have heard from his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who recently assumed responsibility for national security along with his other portfolio. And this is what he had to say. Tonight, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self-defense. President Trump and the administration have taken all necessary steps to protect our forces and remain in close contact with our regional partners. Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. That is a very clear warning he is issuing to Iran, but it is also a warning that is being backed up by action, because the U.S. government has now restricted the movement of some of its staff in Israel, and yesterday it placed non-essential embassy staff in Baghdad on standby for evacuation from Iraq. Now, when the president was asked about that at an event last night, he said it's simply because it's a very dangerous region and we'll see what happens. But I think it's now very clear to all of us why the US government is in the process of issuing that kind of advice to its staff across the Middle East.
The latest from the United States there. Well, Israel is expecting retaliation from Iran, and Israelis have been put on high alert. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle has the latest from Jerusalem.
Well, the country was awoken around 3 a.m. this morning when those Israeli strikes took place in Iran, and millions of people have been sheltering in safe rooms or bunkers ever since, expecting a possible Iranian retaliation. There is now underway a new wave of Israeli strikes across Iran. I think a fourth wave, as more Israeli aircraft conduct airstrikes against key Iranian targets, nuclear sites, ballistic missile sites, military targets, and they are targeting key Iranian military personnel. Israel is still awaiting a response from Iran. I think if that is going to come, then it will come quite swiftly, because quite simply Iran probably does not have time to waste. This is not a one and done operation by Israel. They have warned it could go on for many days, and the longer they have to operate with some freedom in the skies above Iran, the more they'll be able to degrade Iran's military capabilities and abilities to respond to these attacks. The Iranians have made clear in a statement that they will retaliate against both Israel and the United States. But the United States for its part, has also made clear that it is not currently involved in these attacks. They support Israel politically and diplomatically, but militarily they are not involved. But the United States has many military bases around the region, and they will be on high alert because they could be targeted by Iran. If Iran does decide to do that, then they risk dragging the United States into what is now developing into a major conflict between Iran and Israel. So as its first light here and also first light in Iran, the damage is starting to become clear, but I think we are only at the very beginning of what is a major Israeli military offensive against Iran, not just against its nuclear sites, but against major military targets around the country.
And Ali, before I ask you the next question, let me just bring you up to date with what we're hearing again from Iranian state TV, that the Supreme Leader issued a statement that Israeli according to sites that have been struck and also a lot of key people that have been killed in these Israeli attacks.
Well, if the Supreme Leader is due to issue a statement shortly, then that suggests he is still alive, and I don't say that flippantly. Israel is going after senior figures. The commander of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, reportedly killed. Senior military official close to the Supreme Leader reportedly killed as well. One of the unsaid factors in this, one of the unknowns, is whether Israel is also trying to topple the regime in Iran. Certainly, the Israelis believe that Iran is not just militarily weak at the moment, but also politically weak. They see Iran is divided, and there might be a possibility of toppling the regime. Now, whether or not that is an intention or could potentially be a byproduct of what they're doing right now, wait and see. I would have thought that the Supreme Leader's appearance on Iranian television and televisions around the world will not just be to send a message to Israel, but to send a message to the Iranian public as well, that he is still alive, that the regime still lives and is prepared to defend Iran and hit back.
And Ali, just remind us how Israelis are preparing, and how they have been preparing for the past few hours for a possible attack by Iran.
Well, the first indication we had was when air raid sirens sounded across Israel around 3 a.m. this morning. Unusually, that wasn't preceded by a warning alert. Israel's defense systems are now very, very sophisticated, not just its air defenses, but its early warning systems. And so now, if there is an incoming missile attack, and over the last few months there's been regular Houthi attacks, you normally get an alert on your phone if you subscribe to, as most Israelis do, most people who live here do, one of the apps that warns of incoming missiles. And that gives people a couple of minutes to find shelter and safety. And then that's normally followed by sirens across the country as the missiles come in. This time round, I was woken at roughly 3 o'clock in the morning, sound of sirens. There'd been no forewarning. And on the app, there was no map of where the sirens were going off, which struck me as unusual. And then a couple of minutes later, a very loud alarm came over the phone, warning Israelis that the Home Command front guidelines had changed, telling people to shelter in place. Things like gatherings are cancelled, schools are cancelled. And the Israelis now have the ability to effectively sort of hijack the cell phone network here. They did it in October 2024 when Iran launched around 300 ballistic missiles at Israel, and they've done it again twice in the last few hours. It's an alert for everybody, regardless of whether or not they're signed up to the warning apps, to tell people that it is a moment of national emergency. Since then, people around the country, millions of people, certainly people I've been speaking to, have been bedding down in their bunkers, in safe rooms around the country, in their houses or in their buildings. There has been no sign of any retaliatory attack yet. You know, we are prepared to see whether or not missile defense has come into action. That hasn't happened yet, and so everybody is on tenterhooks as to what's going to come next.
Alistair Bunkle with the latest from Jerusalem. And soon after the attacks, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke. He said it was a decisive moment in Israel's history and that Israel had no choice but to act now. Let's take a listen to his whole statement.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. In recent months, Iran has taken steps that it has never taken before, steps to weaponize this enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival. 80 years ago, the Jewish people were the victims of a Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazi regime. Today, the Jewish state refuses to be a victim of a nuclear Holocaust perpetrated by the Iranian regime. Now, as Prime Minister, I've made it clear time and again, Israel call for escalation. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. Last year, 300 carries a ton of explosives and threatens the lives of hundreds of people. Soon, those missiles could carry a nuclear payload, threatening the lives not of hundreds, but of millions. Iran is gearing up to produce 10,000 of those ballistic missiles within 3 years. Now just imagine 10,000 tons of TNT landing on a country the size of New Jersey. This is an intolerable threat. It too must be stopped. Iran is now working on what it calls the new plan to destroy Israel. You see, the old plan failed. Iran and its proxies try to encircle Israel with a ring of fire and to attack it with. But the people of Israel, the soldiers of Israel, rose like lions to defend our country. We crushed Hamas, we devastated Hezbollah, we hit Iranian proxies in Syria and Yemen. And when Iran directly attacked us twice last year, we struck back inside Iran itself. Yet in defending ourselves, we also defend others. We defend our Arab neighbors. They too have suffered from Iran's campaign of carnage. Our actions against Iran's proxy Hezbollah led to the establishment of a new government in Lebanon and the collapse of Assad's murderous regime in Syria. The peoples of those two countries now have a chance for a different future, a better future. So too do the brave people of Iran, and I have a message for them. Our fight is not with you. Our fight is with the brutal dictatorship that has oppressed you for 46 years. I believe that the day of your liberation is near. And when that happens, the great friendship between our two ancient peoples will flourish once again. I want to assure the civilized world, we will not let the world's most dangerous regime get the world's most dangerous weapons. And Iran plans to give those weapons, nuclear weapons, to its terrorist proxies, That would make the nightmare of nuclear terrorism all too real. The increasing range of Iran's ballistic missiles would bring that nuclear nightmare to the cities of Europe and eventually to America. Remember, Iran calls Israel the small Satan. It calls America the great Satan. And this is why for decades, it's led millions in the chants of death to Israel and death to America. Today, Israel is responding to those genocidal calls with action and with a call of our own. Long live Israel and long live America. Our action will help make the world a much safer place. I want to thank President Trump for his leadership in confronting Iran's nuclear weapons program. He has made clear time and again that Iran cannot have a nuclear enrichment program. Today, it is clear that Iran is just buying for time. It refuses to agree to this basic requirement of peaceful nations. That is why we have no choice but to act, and act now. The hardest decision any leader has to make is to thwart a danger before it is fully materialized. Nearly a century ago, facing the Nazis, a generation of leaders failed to act in time. They were paralyzed by the horrors of World War I. They were determined to avoid war at all costs, and they got the worst war ever. They adopted a policy of appeasement. They closed their eyes and ears to all the warning signs. That failure to act resulted in World War II, the deadliest war in history. It claimed the lives of 60 million, including 6 million Jews, a third of my people. After that war, the Jewish people and the Jewish state vowed never again. Well, never again is now. Today, Israel has shown that we have learned the lessons of history. When enemies vow to destroy you, believe them. When enemies build weapons of mass, stop them. As the Bible teaches us, when someone comes to kill you, rise and act first. This is exactly what Israel has done today. We have risen like lions to defend ourselves. Over 3,000 years ago, Moses gave the people of Israel a message that has steeled their resolve ever since. Be strong and courageous, he said. Today, our strong and courageous soldiers and people stand together to defend ourselves against those who seek our destruction. And by defending ourselves, we defend many others, and we roll back a murderous tyranny. Generations from now, history will record that our generation stood its ground, acted in time, and secured our common future. May God bless Israel. May God bless the forces of civilization everywhere. Thank you.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking a little bit earlier about rising targeted military operation that targeted the Iranian nuclear program that the Prime Minister called a threat to Israel's very survival. Words that were echoed by the IDF when they released this statement from spokesperson Brigadier General Efi Defrin, who says the strikes against Iran were to prevent the creation of a nuclear bomb.
For years, the Iranian regime has called for the destruction of the State of Israel, planning and advancing concrete military plans to do so. Over the past few months, intelligence has shown that Iran is closer than ever to obtaining a nuclear weapon. This morning, the IDF began preemptive and precise strikes targeting the Iranian nuclear program in order to prevent the Iranian regime's ability. We have no choice. We are operating against an imminent and existential threat. We cannot allow the Iranian regime to obtain a nuclear weapon that would be a danger to Israel and the entire world. This operation is for our right to exist, for our future. The State of Israel has the right and the obligation to continue to do so. The IDF conducted significant preparations for this operation. We are well prepared, both in defense and offense, to defend ourselves. The IDF will continue to defend the State of Israel.
Well, a little earlier I spoke to Simone Ledeen, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, and asked her what she made of the American role in this.
I think it's clear that there has been coordination with the United States. I note that Secretary of State Marco Rubio issued a statement recently saying the United States had nothing to do with this. I don't think the Iranian regime will see it that way. So we need to watch and see what the reaction is going to be in the hours and days and even weeks ahead. But yes, not a surprise, and especially when you consider some of the news now coming out of Israel, where Israeli media is reporting that Iran actually has all of the components to produce nuclear weapons, and indeed we're starting to assemble those components. And that, of course, is a red line. Everyone, Israel, and others have said for many, many years would not be allowed to happen. So in a sense, Iran had crossed the Rubicon and is facing the consequences tonight.
Israel for years has warned it wouldn't allow Iran to build a nuclear
they were given.
The industrial grade product you need, plus 1 million more. Call, click Grainger.com, or stop by.
Bring Iran to the negotiating table and avoid this situation. But as you say, Israel has for many, many years advertised that it would never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And it seems now as though that was imminent. And so Israel, in its own self-defense, had to take this action.
Like we've been saying, Marco Rubio at pains to say that Israel took this action unilaterally and that the U.S. is not involved. But do you think that this would have happened without the blessing of the United States, or at the very least their knowledge?
I think I believe it's obvious that there was an element of coordination because due to the movements of our civilians out of several, our U.S. government civilians out of several parts of the Middle East. And again, those have been advertised over the last several days. It has not been a secret. And so, yes, the